Hello, 7th graders. Welcome back to another week of US history. This week we're talking about the space race, and the skill we're looking at is historical timelines. So all you need this week is a pencil and a piece of paper, and I want you to ask yourself, how are you feeling mentally? If you need to take a break, please do so. And are you in a space to be productive? And if you feel like you're not, go ahead and try to move somewhere where you feel like you could be. So our two warm-up questions this week, go ahead and write down the answers to these and pause it if you need to once I'm done reading them. After World War II, what country was the greatest adversary of the United States? And what type of government did that country have? So go ahead and pause it in 3, 2, and 1. Okay, welcome back. So the first answer to the first question is the greatest adversary of the United States after World War II was the Soviet Union. Remember that during World War II, the Soviet Union was actually an ally of the United States. But afterwards, the Soviet Union continued to expand their territory and their influence and kind of pitted themselves against the United States. The Soviet Union practiced a type of government called communism, where wealth is distributed equally amongst all the people, which sounds great, but it actually ends up not really working most of the time. And the Soviet Union essentially turned into a dictatorship. So by the end of this lesson, you will be able to describe the chronology and major events of the space race by creating and analyzing historical timelines. We're going to go through the words of the week first. You're going to get some background information on the space race. We'll talk about timelines. And finally, we'll go over the weekly mission very briefly. So the words of the week are satellite, orbit, and cosmonaut. Go ahead and pause it if you need to and write these down with about a line or two space in between so you can write down the definitions. First off, a satellite. An artificial body placed in orbit around the Earth or Moon or another planet in order to collect information or for communication. So a satellite is essentially a piece of technology that is put into space that orbits a planet or something like that. And remember to go ahead and pause it right now if you need to write down the definition. Orbit. Orbit is the curved path of a celestial object or spacecraft around a star, planet, or moon, especially a periodic elliptical revolution. So the orbit is essentially the path that a satellite follows around a planet. And finally, cosmonaut. Cosmonaut is just a Russian astronaut. So when they're talking about an astronaut from Russia, the term cosmonaut is used. I just want to make sure you knew that as well. Okay, so background information on the space race. After World War II, the main struggle in international politics is what we call now the Cold War. The Cold War was fought, in quotation marks, between the United States and the Soviet Union, also known as the USSR, and it dominated almost every decision the United States government made for about 50 years. Now, it's called the Cold War because we never actually fought a war against the Soviet Union. This was a war that was fought through wars with other countries and through spies and like technology races and stuff like that. The main reason it never bubbled into a real big war is because both countries had nuclear weapons, and they knew that, we knew that, and the Soviet Union knew that if we used those nuclear weapons, it would become the end of the entire world as we know it. The space race kind of started because both the United States and the USSR wanted to be the countries that controlled space. This was made possible because of nuclear and rocket technologies that had been developed during and after World War II. So because of the new technologies that were used for military uses, it became possible to be able to send people and animals and satellites into space. So in terms of the space race, the Soviet Union took the first major step on October 4th, 1957, with the launch of Sputnik. Sputnik is a satellite that was about the size of a beach ball and weighed about 183 pounds. It orbited the Earth for about 98 minutes. And if you want to, this is what it looked like on the right there. This was a major shock to the Americans. They had no idea that the Soviet Union was capable of this. And when the Soviet Union put this satellite into space, it really shocked them and terrified them, honestly, to realize how far ahead the Soviet Union actually was. The Soviet Union took another big step when they put the first man into space. So on April 12th, 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first human to enter and safely return from space. And the Americans weren't here yet either. So this was another step forward in the space race for the Soviets. So about a month later, President Kennedy on May 25th, 1961, famously gave a speech that challenged Congress and the American people to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, so by the end of the 1960s. NASA, which I'm sure you've heard of, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, was tasked with kind of most of the brunt work of this. America was sick of losing the space race to the Soviets. It made us look bad, and it also was a threat, could be a threat militarily to us as well. The space race culminated with the Apollo missions. So on July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first people to walk on the moon. There's the famous quote from that moon landing as well. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. So after about 8 years after Kennedy's speech, America became the first country to put men on the moon. And this was a major victory for the Americans, and it kind of almost ended the space race. So we're going to look at two primary sources really quickly that kind of give a good background on it as well. So I want you to look at where it says chart. And what I want you to do is, as I count down from 3 to 1, I want you to pause it. And I want you to spend a couple minutes looking at this. We've looked at charts and graphs in the past, and I want you to use some of those skills that we use to analyze those to analyze this. And I want you to give me about a 1-sentence statement telling me what this actually means. So go ahead and pause it in 3, 2, and 1. Okay, so what I notice when I look at this is that we have federal spending. Federal spending means the amount of government, the amount of money the national government spent. We have the NASA percentage of the budget and the defense percentage of the budget. And what I noticed is those years that we were talking about, so 1958 to about 1969, look how the amount of money that NASA has gotten goes up and up and up until about 1966. The defense budget, though, goes down. Defense budget means anything relating to the military. So as NASA is getting more money, the defense budget is going down. What I really notice is that, especially in the years 1966 and 1965, the NASA budget is very high. And that makes sense because all the technology and the money they would spend here in 1965 and 1966 would go to help put men on the moon in 1969. So a historical statement could be something like this. During the years of the space race, the percentage of the federal budget that NASA received increased greatly from 1958 to 1966. And here's another source. So what this is a firsthand account by a Russian man who's the head of the Cosmonaut Corps. So he's the head of the astronauts, and we're going to just read the first few sentences together. In the last 4 years, the US has been ahead of us in manned space flights, but few people in the Soviet Union know about it. It is only now, when Americans have launched their Apollo 8, that it will be brought home to everyone that we have yielded our supremacy in outer space. So I want you to kind of just give me a sentence what you think that means. What is he actually saying? So go ahead and pause it in 3, 2, and 1. Okay, so when I read this, I think that Nikolai is saying that the Soviet Union in the beginning of the space race was kind of dominating the United States. But towards the end of the space race, the Soviet Union had fallen behind, and they're very disappointed in that. That's kind of what I get from this. Okay, so now timelines. What we're gonna do is I'm gonna talk about timelines very briefly. I'm gonna show you a few examples, and then we'll talk about the mission. So timelines are organizational or visual organizations of dates and events. So they usually have a scale. So right here, 2000XX, these would be different years. Now, let me just tell you what this is first. This language that you can't understand is called lorem ipsum. That is nonsense Latin that web programmers and people doing stuff on computer put into place just to show you what something would look like if it had text in it. And I wanted to just show you it with lorem ipsum so we're not distracted by all these events in here. So this is just like something you would just delete and just fill in. So this timeline, notice it has date, event, date, event, date, event. And the ones on the left would be earlier dates. The ones on the right would be later dates. So this would be a horizontal timeline. This is another example of a timeline. This one is more linear, has more linear breaks to it. It's more of a decorative feature. It kind of has the same thing. And this one would be a vertical timeline. So each of these, when you're creating your timelines, are viable options. All timelines have to have 3 main features, though. They have to have some kind of visual representation of time passing. Here it's from a line. Here it's from a line that goes left to right. Here, again, it's from a line that goes from left to right. They have to have a date, and they have to have an event. Now, sometimes some timelines do this in a really cool way. I want to show you this one Russian timeline. So what this one is you actually control the little astronaut in the guy, and every time you get to a new date, You can click on it, and it's going to give you a little bit more information. So this one has those 3 criteria. It has a way of kind of moving, showing that time is passing. It has the event, and it also has the date. The way they show the time passing with this one is the little guy, astronaut guy running. So here's the link to that if you want to check it out. It's really cool. So what you're going to be doing for this week's mission is you're going to be create your own timeline of the space race using provided information. I'm going to give you a block of text, a couple paragraphs with important dates and events in them. And you're going to have to pull those dates out and events out and create your own timeline. Now, whatever your timeline looks like is completely up to you. It could be vertical, horizontal, it could be more linear, or it could have some really cool visual elements in it as well. So feel free to get creative. I hope you guys have a great time with it.